Welcome, and thank you for joining me today. I'm going to be looking into the lore of each of the main bosses in Elden Ring and including a compilation of their boss fights. To keep things interesting, I used different weapons for each boss, so I hope you find this relaxing, and thanks again for watching. Godrick the Grafted is a distant descendant of Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, which means he is of the golden lineage, and he is obsessed with this lineage, wielding an axe which resembles Godfrey's. Though he puts on an air of superiority, in truth, he's a bit of a coward. Kenneth Haidt tells us how Godrick fled Leyndell after the Shattering and hid in Stormvale, where Radahn wouldn't find him. But Malenia did, and he lost in battle to her, but instead of dying with honor, he begged her to spare his life. Now he's grasping for any shred of dignity that he can. He uses the art of grafting in the hopes of gaining power. Rodrika tells us about the companions she crossed the sea with, who traveled to Stormvale Castle to be grafted. It seems some tarnished consider having their limbs grafted to Godrick as an honor, but when we see the true abomination that Godrick has become, it's revealed the reality is more grim than they expected. To fight Godrick, I used the Magma Worm Scale Sword. Supposedly the Magma Worms were once humans who partook in Dragon Communion, and for that they were cursed to crawl around on their stomachs as big lizard-like creatures. The Ash of War for this sword is the Magma Guillotine, where you hold the sword in both hands and smash it into the ground to create a pool of magma. I'm also using the Giant Seal, which is used by fire prelates and fire monks. It's made from braids of red hair surrounding an ornament depicting the fell god's eye. Fire monks and prelates are guardians of the Flame of Ruin, located in the mountaintops of the giants. We encounter Rennala, the Lunar Queen, in the Raya Lucaria Grand Library, surrounded by fledgling students, or as she calls them, sweetings. These students have undergone rebirth through the Amber Egg, which contains the great rune of the unborn. Rennala is obsessed with perfecting the rebirthing process, but it seems each time a subject undergoes rebirth, they lose a little bit of themselves, and eventually they become completely dependent on it. All the sweetings rebirthed by the Amber Egg are frail and short-lived. Also, rebirth doesn't work for every type of being in the lands between. We see this when Buck, the seamster, goes to Rennala to be reborn as a human and meets a very sad end. However, I would imagine the idea of losing one's memories sounds like a good thing for Rennala, as she has many memories she would likely wish to forget. Her former husband, Radagon, abandoning her, or the death of her daughter, Ranni. Ranni and Rennala seem to have had a strong bond, Rennala having guided her daughter to find her own dark moon to draw power from, just as Rennala draws her magic from the full moon. But Ranni had been chosen as an Empyrean, meaning that one day she could become a god. Each Empyrean is chosen by a set of 2 fingers and also receives a vassal beast to be their shadow. For Ronnie, this is Blythe, the half-wolf. But Ronnie rejected the Golden Order and crafted a plan to bring about a new age, the Age of Stars. The first step was to rid herself of her body, so she orchestrated the Night of the Black Knives. Her half-brother, Godwyn, was assassinated and his spirit perished, while Ronnie slew her own flesh, and her spirit lived on in a new body created after the image of her mentor, a snowy crone. This would have been another devastation for Rennala, as Ronnie went into hiding after the Night of the Black Knives, so Rennala likely thought she was dead. In her second phase, Rennala makes use of a wide range of sorceries, demonstrating her mastery and the reason why she was named head of the Academy of Rykard. She also calls forth a multitude of spirit ashes, including wolves, dragons, bloodhound knights, and trolls. It seems that the ancient art of summoning originated in the Eternal Cities, so there could be a connection between the Carian royal family and the Nox who inhabited Nokron and Noxtella. Not only does Rennala use spirit ashes, but it's also Ronnie who gives us the spirit calling bell. Another piece of evidence connecting them to the Nox is the Moon of Noxtella talisman, which depicts the lost black moon, which could potentially be the same dark moon that Ronnie encountered when she was young. Starscourge Radahn, the son of Rennala and Radagon, is a once admirable warrior who has been driven mad by scarlet rot. After the shattering, each of the demigods claimed a great rune from the Elden Ring, and a great war ensued. As the most powerful of the demigods, Radahn and Malenia faced one another in battle, and as a last resort, Malenia unleashed her scarlet rot on Radahn and all of Caelid. Witch hunter Jaren, who once served as a commander under General Radahn, swore an oath that they would ensure they both die honorably in battle. That's why we find Jaren hosting the Radahn festival, inviting champions from all over the lands between to challenge Radahn and end his life of madness with honor. Radahn uses gravitational magic, which he learned from an alabaster lord in Celia. With this power, he is able to stop the motion of the stars which guide fate. Given he was a strong supporter of the Golden Order, perhaps he knew of his sister Ranni's plans. He's holding back the meteor, which was on a course to strike Limgrave, opening up a passage to the Eternal City, Nokron. The next stage in Ranni's plan is to find the finger-slaying blade in Nokron and use it to slay the 2 fingers that had chosen her as an Empyrean, thus freeing herself from the control of the Golden Order. It could be Radahn was aware of this. We don't know for sure, but either way, once we defeat him, Ronnie's fate is set back in motion. I used the Inquisitor's Gariandol. This candle stand is used as an instrument of torture on nobles in Volcano Manor. Its spikes pierce the flesh and singe the wounds with flame. I also used the incantation Frozen Lightning Spear, which channels the power of Dragonkin soldiers from the Eternal City. Having never seen the sky, they've never witnessed real lightning, but instead they harness the power of ice lightning. And I also made use of Lightning Spear at the end, which is an incantation of the ancient dragon cult, which was born from the friendship formed between Godwyn and the dragon Fortissax. The ancient dragon cult in Leyndell was able to learn a great deal from dragons, and their incantations can be enhanced by using the Gravelstone seal, which is made from the stone scale of an ancient dragon. The regal Ancestor Spirit is a being that exists outside the reach of the Golden Order. It draws its power from the death of the other creatures around it and creates new life through its budding horns. It's said that a beast whose horns bud over and over again one day becomes an ancestral spirit. The winged great horn weapon we can get with this boss's remembrance is meant to reap the lives of beings which experience no sprouting, and maybe that means the spirits of those beings will be absorbed by the Ancestor Spirit and used to create new life. We come across one Ancestor Spirit in Shofra River and one in the Ancestral Woods. There's evidence of more of their species too. The shamans of the ancestral followers use the skull of a baby ancestral spirit that hasn't yet grown horns as a weapon that spews forth a magical, watery substance. The followers worship the ancestor spirits for creating new life through their horns. Unlike the Golden Order, who has a negative view of the horned creatures, like misbegotten and omens. Back in the time of the primordial crucible, horns were a manifestation of the Erdtree's vital primal energies. It was a time of abundant growth in the lands between. People had crucible knots sprouting from their bodies. These were the bony growths that embodied aspects of various creatures, and the crucible knots were considered divine back then. We can still find budding horns on some creatures, suggesting that the energy of the primordial crucible still remains in the lands between, though very little now. Because under the Golden Order, horns and other vestiges of the crucible have come to be seen as impure and primitive. But underground, the ancestral followers aren't subject to the Golden Order's influence. It makes sense that this boss is weak to holy damage. So to fight the ancestor spirit, I used Marika's hammer. It was created in the lands of the Newmen, where Marika descended from. The hammer is splintered with rune fragments. This is the hammer that she used to shatter the Elden Ring, and Radagon used to try to repair it. Lich Dragon Fortissax was once known as the mightiest boulder stone. He's one of the ancient dragons whose scales are made of gravelstone and who wield red lightning. Long ago, there was a war between the ancient dragons and the Golden Order. Queen Marika was gaining power, so much so that she had become a great threat to the ancient dragons who were the rulers of the previous age. During the war, Fortissax fought against Godwyn the Golden, the son of Marika and Godfrey. It was close, but eventually Godwyn defeated Fortissax, earning the dragon's respect and friendship. It was through their friendship that the ancient dragon cult was formed. This was a group of knights who practiced the use of lightning incantations, learning directly from the dragons, and the importance of mutual respect and friendship between the dragons and the knights continued to be important, because in order to survive cladding themselves in lightning, the knights would need to earn the dragon's love. Fortissax had a sister, Lanciax, who had also survived the war of the ancient dragons. She transformed into a human to be able to commune with the knights, and she became a priestess of the ancient dragon cult. And of all the knights, she loved Vyke the most. No doubt that the powers Lanciax shared with Vyke would have helped him to get so close to becoming Elden Lord. That was until he was scorched by the flame of frenzy. For Fortissax, it was the Knight of the Black Knives that took his companion. Assassins came for Godwyn with knives imbued with the power of the Rune of Death, and Godwyn became the first demigod to die. It seems Fortissax somehow entered Godwyn's body and fought the death within it for a long time. But eventually, death began to overtake him as well, and now we find him still within Godwyn, wielding the same golden lightning that Godwyn once did, but it's corrupted with death. In this fight, I'm wearing a piece of the Drake Knight armor, which is adorned with trophies collected from hunting dragons. Drake Knights don't hunt dragons simply for sport, but because they have a deep admiration of dragons and wish to embody their strength. From birth, they don't speak, and they partake in dragon communion, learning how to harness the power of dragons by offering up the hearts of those they slay. I used the great jar cannon to fight Fortissax. This weapon is found near Volcano Manor, a remnants of the assault carried out by Leyndell against Volcano Manor in an attempt to bring Rykard under the control of Queen Marika's forces. Rykard, the Lord of Blasphemy, is the son of Rennala and Radagon, and he used to serve as a justiciar, an enforcer of the Golden Order's justice. However, he eventually found his way to Volcano Manor atop Mount Gelmir and disavowed the Golden Order. After the Shattering, the most horrific war took place when the army of Leyndell came to Volcano Manor to put an end to the traitor Rykard and his followers. But Rykard had other interests. He was intrigued by the ancient religion he discovered in Mount Gelmir, and he ventured deeper into the mountain in search of an ancient god said to possess incredible power, the serpent god Igle. In Volcano Manor, we come across the Temple of Igle. Hanging over the temple altar is the shed skin of a giant serpent, and on the altar we find the serpent's amnion, which is the sac in which a serpent embryo developed. When we show this to Raya, she remembers the scent of her birth mother, Daydream. She was a woman that performed ritualistic acts to mate with a giant serpent, giving birth to serpent-human hybrids like Raya and the others that inhabit Volcano Manor. Rykard eventually managed to find the serpent god deep in the mountain. He had a vision of the great serpent devouring the world, and Rykard was willingly consumed, thereby merging his power with Igle. Consequently, all of his followers abandoned him, except for his consort, Lady Tanith. To her, Rykard's union with the snake only deepened her dedication to him. Lady Tanith was a dancer who Rykard met during his travels in distant lands. It said that Rykard's transformation into the Serpent of Blasphemy was when Tanith became truly charmed by him. Since then, she has recruited numerous recusants to join Volcano Manor in opposition to the Golden Order. Recusants must prove themselves by defeating other tarnished champions, eventually earning the right to an audience with the Lord of Volcano Manor. It's then that a recusant learns what they've really been fighting for, the right to be devoured by the great serpent. Rykard can summon the embittered spirits of those he's devoured to attack us, and on his blade we can see the remains of those that reside within the serpent's bowels. Now they all share the same blood. They've become their lord's family. In my battle against Rykard, I used the Serpent Hunter Great Spear, which was said to have been used to hunt an immortal serpent long ago. This weapon was sought after by Rykard's former followers after he fed himself to Igle. But even though it seems they found the weapon, whoever had attempted to use it on Rykard failed, leaving the spear for us to find. I wore the eye surcoat armor. The insignia on it identifies the wearer as an agent of Sir Gideon Ofnir. Interestingly, the same surcoat is worn by the recusant Henricus. Perhaps it was under Gideon's orders that Henricus joined Volcano Manor to gather intel, but it seems he ended up being devoured. It is said that when the sorcerer Azur looked into the primeval current and glimpsed the darkness of the abyss, he was driven mad. The void, a place beyond comprehension, was the birthplace of Astel. Astel is a malformed star, its body comprised of multicolored star debris, along with a strangely human skull. We find other similar creatures in caves and underground areas, in consecrated snowfields and Ainsel River. So how did Astel, the natural born, come to be here in the lands between? As a falling star of ill omen, Astel destroyed one of the eternal cities and took away its sky. The most likely place referred to as the city Astel destroyed is the nameless eternal city in Deeproot Depths, where we find the ruins of Nox's architecture and where there's no longer any false sky, unlike Noxtella and Nokron. where the false sky remains intact. Being one of the most mysterious bosses in Elden Ring, there are many theories. One is that Astel was created by the Nox themselves. The Nox were a people obsessed with creating life. They created the Albinorics, the dragonkin soldiers, and they were even attempting to create a god. It could be that Astel was the result of experiments by the Nox, and that it turned its gravitational power against its own creators. Or what I personally think is the most likely is that Astel was sent by the Greater Will to destroy the Eternal City as punishment. Not only had the Nox taken the creation of life into their own hands, but they also forged the finger-slaying blade, which had the power to harm vassals of the Greater Will. And so the Greater Will sent down a falling star to destroy the largest of the Eternal Cities. There are other beings we find with ties to meteors. The falling star beasts, for example, are meteors that fall from the sky and leave craters in their wake. Those known as star callers scavenge amongst the craters for shards of rock that contain gravitational magic. But gravity stones aren't the only things that have come from a meteor strike. Long ago, an ancient race of beings rose to life after a meteor strike, the Alabaster and Onyx Lords. They have stony skin and the ability to use gravitational magic, suggesting they were formed from part of the meteorite. I'm guessing they get their name from the type of stone they resemble, either onyx or alabaster, and because of the reference their destructive power inspired, they were called lords. An interesting note is that the Onyx Lord's weapon uses gravity magic to repel, whereas the Alabaster Lord's sword pulls you in. To fight Astel, I used the Celebrant Skull, which is found in Windmill Village, where the celebrants dance and laugh creepily. This skull, which appears larger than a human, is decorated with colorful ribbons and is one of the tools used in the rituals of Dominula Festival. Morgott, the Omen King, is the current ruler of Leyndell, a status he likely never imagined attaining in his youth. As an omen, Morgott has horn-like growths all over his body, an affliction that is looked down on in the lands between. Most babies born as omens have their horns severed, resulting in many of them perishing. But those born of noble families retain their horns, and instead are locked away in the subterranean shunning grounds under Leyndell. As the son of Queen Marika and Godfrey, Morgott and his twin brother Mohg were imprisoned in the shunning grounds. But during the shattering, they escaped, while the other demigods began fighting amongst one another. Morgott was the only one that remained in Leyndell as the Erdtree's loyal protector. He recanted his accursed omen blood, sealing it away in his sword. And since then, he has continued to protect the Erdtree by repelling the other demigods and any tarnished champions who have ambitions to be Elden Lord. For although he was never loved in return, Morgott has a deep love for the Erdtree and the Golden Order, To fight Morgott, I used 2 Knight Rider flails, which are dropped by the Knight's Cavalry in Weeping Peninsula. After the shattering, Morgott took the alias Margit the Fell Omen and led the Knight's Cavalry as they sought out tarnished champions and delivered death to them. For my fight with Margit the Fell, I used the Envoy's Longhorn, one of the instruments played by the Oracle Envoys we find in Leyndell and Miquella's Halig Tree. It is said they play their horns to herald in a new age or god. Miquella, Morgott's Empyrean half-brother, had been born cursed with eternal childhood, so he had cocooned himself inside the Halig Tree and entered a deep slumber, from which he was meant to awaken fully grown as a god. But his cocoon was ripped from the Halig Tree prematurely. Mohg, Lord of Blood, lived his early life locked away under Leyndell with his twin brother Morgott. After the shattering, he also broke free of his shackles, but instead of staying with his brother to protect the Erd Tree, Mohg traveled deep underground where he would encounter an outer god known as the Formless Mother or the Mother of Truth. When he stood before her, his accursed blood was ignited with flame. He realized it was his omen blood that had earned the Formless Mother's blessing, and he became besotted with his own curse. With the power of an outer god to back him, Mohg laid the plan for a new dynasty, where he would rule as consort to a god. That's why Mohg stole Miquella away from the Halig Tree, taking him underground to Mohgwyn Palace, where he would join Miquella in the cocoon until the time came for his new dynasty to arise. But in order to be successful, the Mohgwyn dynasty needed supporters, so Mohg began abducting or coercing recruits from across the lands between and imbibing them with his accursed blood. He then bid his new followers go out to collect blood as offerings. We come across bloody fingers throughout the game, as well as sanguine nobles who are missionaries spreading the gospel of accursed blood to help grow the ranks of supporters for the Mohgwyn dynasty. The bloody finger, White Mask Vare, seeks out tarnished who are disillusioned with the 2 fingers. Vare appears to be one of Mohg's greatest supporters, but before that, he was a war surgeon, and when Mohg abducted him, along with the other war surgeons, it was only Vare who was able to tame the accursed blood. Before this mountain was inhabited by fire giants, it was home to ice dragons like Borealis, who we fight on the frozen lake. However, when the fire giants claimed this mountain as their own, they chased the ice dragons off the peak and founded their own civilization. The fire giants followed the fell god, a god of chaos and destruction, and as a form of worship, they tended the flame of ruin, which was contained in a huge forge, which is now only smoldering. But we can imagine how intensely hot the flame of ruin once burned, which is why it posed such a threat to the Erd Tree. Out of fear of the potential that the Erd Tree could be burned by the flame of ruin, Queen Marika and the Golden Order gathered their army to wage war against the fire giants. The Golden Order gathered the support of many across the lands between, including those that would previously been considered outcasts by them. The trolls, which are descended from giants, betrayed their forefathers by joining arms with the Golden Order. This was an unfortunate decision on their part, considering now trolls seem to be treated as little more than animals. The Zamor also joined the war against the giants. They were inhabitants of the same mountains and had long been adversaries of the fire giants. Zamor wields the power of freezing wind in opposition to the giants' flame. They are a long-lived people, fervently devoted to winter, and as such, they were heralded as heroes in the war against the giants. There were also the Thorn Sorcerers. It looks like what killed the fire giants that we see around the mountaintop was thorn sorceries. This suggests that during the war against the giants, thorn sorcerers were enlisted into the Golden Order's army. These thorn sorcerers were originally exiled criminals who had their eyes gouged out, having lost their sight. In the eternal darkness, they discovered the Blood Star. Thorn sorceries are channeled through red glintstone, and the description of the staff of the guilty tells us how red glintstone is created through blood sacrifice. The Thorn Sorcerers discovered this ability and gained the knowledge of thorn sorceries like Briars of Sin and Briars of Punishment, which work by inflicting injury on the caster, which creates tendrils of blood thorns to stab upwards from the ground. The discoveries of thorn sorcerers made them the most reviled of the Academy of Raya, but evidently the prejudice towards thorn sorcerers didn't prevent the Golden Order from using their abilities to defeat the fire giants. During the war, it is said Marika faced the fell god herself and defeated him, but it seems the power of the fell god wasn't completely destroyed, and that the fire giants themselves house the power of their god within their chests, and Marika realized the flame of ruin could never be fully extinguished, so she cursed the final fire giant left standing to tend the forge for eternity. This fire giant keeps the flame smoldering and protects it from any who come to claim its power, inadvertently protecting the Erd Tree from being burned. After the war, Marika enlisted a group to watch over the flame of ruin as guardians, the fire monks. Thorn sorcerers were also enlisted into this duty. The fire monks are commanded by fire prelates, whose heavy armor represents the weight and gravity of their vows. At first, the fire monks solemnly kept watch over the forbidden flame of ruin, but over time, the fear of the flame turned to obsession, until the fire monks began to revere the flame. They took the image of the fell god onto their chest plates, and the fire prelates wore helms fashioned after the forge, in which embers would surge with flame when the fire prelate's faith reached its zenith. Fire monks practiced flame incantations just as the fire giants had done before they were wiped out. But eventually the fire monks developed a lazy arrogance towards the flame. So Birak, the most hallowed monk of their order, severed his own head to prove his faith to the others, as his faith yet smolders from within. The fire monks continue to worship the flame from their posts on the mountaintops of the giants, though some have traveled to Liurnia in pursuit of Radahn, a man who stole the flame of the fell god incantation from Chief Guardian Arganthi, who had been tasked with keeping it secret. Other fire monks followed in the footsteps of Amon, who abandoned his post out of fear of the giant's flame, instead swearing fealty to the black flame of the glow-eyed queen. We know of Godfrey as the first Elden Lord, but before the age of the Erdtree in prehistoric times, the god of the ancient dragons held sway over the lands, and Placidusax was Elden Lord. Just imagine what Placidusax would have been like in his prime, with 5 fire-breathing heads, impenetrable gravelstone scales, giant slicing claws, and the power of red lightning. But there were 3 events that led to the downfall of the ancient dragons. One being that the god of the ancient dragons abandoned them for reasons unknown, and also that a meteor struck Farum Azula, the home of the ancient dragons, causing it to crumble, its ruins falling from the sky and landing in Limgrave and Liurnia. And then there was the War of the Ancient Dragons. As the age of Queen Marika's Golden Order dawned, the ancient dragons would have become increasingly concerned with the growing power of the Golden Order. It was the ancient dragon Grandsax who struck the first blow on Leyndell with his mighty bolt. This was the first time the walls of Leyndell had fallen. The attack provoked the Golden Order's retaliation. Leyndell's forces invaded Farum Azula, most likely led by Godfrey and his Crucible Knights. The Tree Sentinels were among the Golden Order's forces, but they realized in order to defeat dragons, they would have to become dragons themselves. So they had armor fashioned after gravelstone scales, and they made shields and weapons from dragon claws. The Golden Order was victorious, and only a handful of ancient dragons still exist after the war. But over time, the descendants of ancient dragons have spread across the lands. Modern dragons are paltry in comparison to their ancestors. They lost their front legs, which ancient dragons could use to attack with their massive claws. Modern dragons also only have 2 wings, as opposed to 4. They lost the ability to channel ancient dragons' lightning, and gravelstone scales have been replaced with more reptilian-type scales and feathers. Despite this, modern dragons are still formidable, but it seems their kind will soon fade into legend as the ancient dragons did. The elder dragon, Grail, who is the mother of all modern dragons, lies immobile in Dragon Barrow. It seems the scarlet rot which infects all of Caelid is the source of her illness, and it's causing the newly born dragons to become more and more feeble. Currently, Placidusax awaits the return of his god at the heart of the storm, where time has ceased. The few remaining dragons, along with the beastmen of Farum Azula, guard the mausoleum where their Elden Lord is enshrined, perhaps hoping that one day he will regain his power over the lands between. The other boss that we face in Farum Azula is Maliketh, the half-brother and faithful shadow of Queen Marika. But before this, we knew him as Grank, the beast clergyman who asks us to hunt down those who live in death and collect the death root that has grown across the lands between since Godwin's death. His hunger for death seems insatiable, and it's not until we find out his true identity as Maliketh that his hunger begins to make sense. Long ago, Maliketh defeated the Godskins and the woman who created them, the Glowmide Queen. The Glowmide Queen was an Empyrean who drew power from the Rune of Death, channeling the power of destined death as black flame through her sword. The Glowmide Queen swaddled each Godskin apostle herself in a cloth made from sewn together skin, so even from infancy, it seems like the apostles were taught to adorn themselves with Godskin. The threat of the Glowmide Queen and her followers, whose sole purpose is to kill gods, skin them, and wear their hides, was of course a threat to Marika. So Marika had Maliketh wield the Rune of Death to defeat the Glowmide Queen. Some Godskins still survive, but it seems to me that without the Glowmide Queen, they don't have a united purpose anymore. We find them all over the lands between, like the Godskin Apostle in Windmill Village, who seems to be overseeing the festival of Dominula, where the celebrants make ritual sacrifices by flaying their victims, or the Godskin Noble in Volcano Manor, who may have been drawn to the shed skin of the serpent god in the Temple of Igle, or even here in Farum Azula, where we fight the Godskin duo. Maybe they're drawn here by the Rune of Death, but without the Glowmide Queen, they can never reclaim its power. Maliketh's defeat of the Glowmide Queen would have been a great victory for him, but on the night of the Black Knives, Maliketh faced failure. A shard of the Rune of Death was stolen and used to slay Godwyn the Golden. So Marika had Maliketh seal away the Rune of Death inside himself, so it could never be taken again. But after Godwyn died, Deathroot began to sprout up around the lands between, remnants of the power of death that was stolen that night. This is why I think Maliketh, as Grank, wants to consume all the Deathroot we find, to complete his task of sealing away destined death entirely. Malenia and her twin brother Mikola are the offspring of Queen Marika and her consort Lord Radagon. But both were cursed, Mikola with eternal childhood and Malenia with scarlet rot that would grow from within her, slowly eating away at her body. The twins had a strong bond, with Malenia becoming the blade of Mikola, his protector, and Mikola working tirelessly to search for something that could stop the spread of the scarlet rot within Malenia. He eventually managed to create an unalloyed golden needle that could quell the rotting sickness, as well as unalloyed gold prosthesis to replace the limbs Malenia had lost to the rot. Malenia is known for being the fiercest fighter in all the lands between. When she was young, she met a master swordsman who wielded the flowing curved sword. It is said that this master once defeated an outer god of rot. It was from him that she learned the technique of fighting with fluid movements like flowing water, and perhaps this technique allowed her to slow the rotting sickness for a time. As stagnant water turns foul, flowing water prevents decay. After the shattering, Malenia proved herself as one of the strongest Empyreans, if not the strongest. She also had an army of clean-wrought knights. She easily defeated Godrick the Grafted and went to face Radahn, one of the greatest warriors to ever live. In order to stop Radahn, Malenia had to release her scarlet rot, blooming into an Aeonia flower. The rot infected Radahn and all of Caelid. After this battle, Malenia fell into a slumber, and in an act of heroism, one of the few survivors of the battle and a loyal clean-wrought knight, Finlay, carried her all the way to the Halig tree where Miquella was cocooned. But when Malenia had bloomed, she had left behind pieces of herself. Millicent and her sisters. They are referred to either as daughters or offshoots of Malenia. And the unalloyed gold needle that had been holding back the spread of the rotting sickness was left behind in the swamp of Aeonia her blooming had created. Miquella's Halig tree was meant to be a place where all those who were cast out by the Golden Order could come and find a safe haven. But that was before Mohg ripped Miquella away from the tree. Now Malenia awaits her brother's return, still dedicated to the idea that one day he will become a god. Without the unalloyed golden needle embedded in her flesh, her scarlet rot has spread throughout the Halig tree, and the pests that worship rot have come to inhabit the tree's roots. However, if we complete Millicent's questline and return the needle to Malenia, we can return to her the sense of self which she has lost. Before the age of Queen Marika's Golden Order, Orlu was already known as a great warrior. He had an insatiable bloodlust and found his purpose in battle. These qualities are most likely what drew Marika's attention. I believe Queen Marika was still at the beginning of her rule, and there were still many threats to her new order for which she needed someone skilled as a military leader. Also, being from the time of the primordial crucible, which I think we can assume because he commands the Crucible Knights, having Orlu by her side could be a way to gain the support of those in the lands between that were resistant to the new order. So, Queen Marika took Orlu as her consort and gave him the title of First Elden Lord. Though we know there were other Elden Lords before him, this could have been a way to erase them. This is when Orlu took on a new name, Godfrey. he took the beast regent Sarash onto his back to quell his insatiable lust for blood. As Elden Lord, Godfrey led the successful campaign against the fire giants who posed a threat to the Erdtree with the flame of ruin. He also led his army into Limgrave and the Weeping Peninsula. At that time, Stormvale Castle was the stronghold of the Stormlord, whose identity is inconclusive. The most likely theories seem to be the Stormhawk King, whose spirit ashes say he ruled as sovereign back when Stormvale's winds raged. Or the Stormlord could have been Placidusax, the former Elden Lord who lies at the heart of the storm. Either way, after Godfrey defeated the Stormlord, he claimed the castle Stormvale. The raging storm, which had once been the cradle of the Warhawks, has over time lost its intensity, and though some hawks remain, they have been subjugated, their wings chained, helmets placed on their head which restrict their vision and act as flamethrowers, and their talons removed and blades grafted on instead. The fate of the Stormhawks is honestly one of the saddest stories in Elden Ring. During this time as Elden Lord, Godfrey had 3 children with Queen Marika, Godwyn the Golden, and the Omen twins, Morgott and Mohg. Based on his reaction to finding Morgott's corpse at the beginning of this boss fight, as well as his connection to the time of the primordial crucible, when omens would have been revered, I think we can assume that he did care for his omen children, but because of Queen Marika's golden order, he had to allow them to be sent down into the shunning grounds. Eventually, Godfrey's time as Elden Lord came to an end. When his final worthy enemy was defeated, the grace began to fade from his eyes, and he and his kin became the first of the tarnished. Queen Marika exiled Godfrey and the other tarnished from the lands between. They left in wooden ships, and once they found land, they began a long march, looking for a new place to call home. Once they found a place to settle, Godfrey took back his original name, Hoarah, and he must have had more children because we meet one of his descendants, Nefeli. In the new land, the Tarnished were faced with many wars, and generations lived and died. While back in the lands between, death had been sealed away. But sometime after the shattering, the fallen Tarnished began regaining the sight of grace and journeyed back to the lands between. For this fight, I used the Carrion Regal Scepter because of its scaling, and had the Staff of Loss in my other hand to boost invisible sorceries. The Staff of Loss is found in Celia, Town of Sorcery, which is located right above Nokron, and so the sorcerers in Celia had strong connections to the Eternal City, and it seems like their sorceries were developed from knowledge they gathered from the Night Maidens. The sorcerers in Celia lived an ascetic life where they practiced self-discipline and refused themselves any pleasures. They were assassins who went as far as to hunt their fellow sorcerers. They would use any means necessary, like turning their weapons invisible to appear unarmed, or using ambush shard, which fires a projectile from behind their opponents. One of the pivotal moments in Elden Ring is when it is revealed that Radagon and Marika are the same being, but there isn't anything conclusive enough to tell us what exactly Radagon's origins are. Was he a separate being before joining with Marika? Were he and Marika always one? Or did Marika create him in a similar fashion to how Nox created Albinaurix? Radagon is said to have hated his own red hair, which was a characteristic of the fire giants. Maybe that suggests that Radagon was descended from giants. Or, since Radagon was a devout Golden Order fundamentalist, maybe he just hated his own hair because it was similar to an enemy of the Golden Order. Whatever Radagon's origins were, we know he became a skilled champion on the battlefield. Queen Marika even went so far as to call him a leal hound of the Golden Order, suggesting his devotion was extreme even to her. He would gladly take up arms against anyone that opposed Leyndell. The Carian royal family that ruled over Liurnia was one such threat, so Radagon led the army of Leyndell into Liurnia. On the battlefield, he met Rennala, and the two became besotted with one another. At least, that's how it seemed. On Radagon's side, I think there's a real possibility that this was a ploy to ensure the Carians would submit to the Golden Order's rule. After Radagon and Rennala were married, Radagon ordered the Carian preceptors to wear the Mask of Confidence, which covers the mouth to ensure that all their matters would be kept secret. So Radagon wanted to suppress the teaching of Carian sorcery, but that didn't stop him from studying sorcery himself while he was married to Rennala. Together, Radagon and Rennala had 3 children, Ranni, Rykard, and Radahn. But after a time, Radagon abandoned Rennala, leaving her with the Amber Egg, which contained the great rune of the Unborn. Radagon journeyed back to Leyndell, where he became Queen Marika's consort and Elden Lord. And he and Marika had a pair of twins, Mikola and Malenia. It seems Mikola had a good relationship with his father growing up. Radagon shared Golden Order fundamentalist incantations with his son, and Mikola even created some incantations of his own to share with Radagon. It seems that Mikola and Malenia also had a good relationship with their half-brother Godwyn, because after his death, Mikola created the Golden Epitaph sword in remembrance of him, and he also seemed to have been seeking a solution to give Godwyn a true death and stop the rise of those who live in death. So it sounds like the twins had a good childhood growing up in Leyndell. However, Mikola realized that the Golden Order couldn't cure his sister's rotting sickness, and so he began searching for his own answers in the study of unalloyed gold. After Godwyn was slain on the night of the Black Knives, Marika was so distraught that it seems this event made her doubt the greater will, and angry at fate, she took her anger out on the Elden Ring, shattering it with her hammer. But Radagon, being ever faithful to the Golden Order, attempted to repair it, though he was unsuccessful. So he sealed off the Erd Tree, perhaps to both protect the Elden Ring and contain Queen Marika. When we defeat Radagon, his body is transformed into a sword, which is wielded by the Elden Beast. All his life, Radagon had been doing the bidding of the Golden Order, and now, even in death, he is a servant of the Elden Ring. The Elden Beast is a vassal of the Greater Will, sent down to the lands between on a golden star. It is the physical embodiment of order, and based on the description of Elden Star's incantation, it sounds as if the golden star was what became the Elden Ring. We can see, even at the beginning of our fight with the Elden Beast, the spot on his stomach has already been fractured, and I think the most likely explanation is that when Marika shattered the Elden Ring, she caused this damage to the Elden Beast. I think the shattering is an example of what Gold Mask realized when he discovered the mending rune of perfect order. The imperfections of the Golden Order were caused by the fickleness of the gods. Throughout Elden Ring, we see gods and demigods acting as humans would, with their own personal motivations in mind. There are those like Godrick and Rykard who seek power, or those like Mikola and Malenia who seem to act out of love, or Radagon and Radahn who have a strong sense of loyalty and duty. And then there's Ranni and arguably Marika, who seem to be driven by the desire for freedom. All of their actions have taken such a heavy toll on the inhabitants of the lands between. Caelid was decimated by scarlet rot. Deathroot has spread throughout the land from Godwyn's corpse. Entire civilizations have been wiped out, like the fire giants and the ancient dragons. Even the act of sealing away the rune of death has forced all in the lands between to live eternally. Which might sound pleasant at first, but we witness the truth of the matter, with former nobles wandering the lands as undead beings, scavenging for runes, having forgotten what they were originally searching for. The fact that even Gold Mask, a devoted scholar of the Golden Order, came to the conclusion that Marika and her demigod children have caused instability is telling. So perhaps Ranni's idea of leaving this land and traveling far away into the void, taking with her the stars that guide fate, would finally free the lands between from the control of such volatile gods and the Greater Will. Or maybe if we just choose to restore the cycle of death, the lands between will finally come into balance. Well, for those of you who are still awake, thank you so much for watching until the end. Good night, fellow Tarnished.